The email arrived on a Tuesday, a day normally reserved for soul-crushing budget reviews and project milestone meetings. It landed in my inbox not with the usual sterile thwip of corporate correspondence, but with a silent, almost predatory grace. The subject line was simple: an invitation from the President's Circle. My heart gave a sharp, ambitious thud against my ribs. For 5 years at Aegis Dynamics, I'd poured my life into climbing the ladder, sacrificing weekends and relationships for the sake of project deadlines in the defense and biotech sector. This was it, the validation. The message itself was a masterpiece of corporate seduction. Heavy digital vellum embossed with the Aegis eagle, its talons clutching a strand of DNA. It informed me, Arthur Penn, that my work had not gone unnoticed. I was one of 20 employees selected for the inaugural President's Circle Award. The prize wasn't a bonus or stock options, but something far more exclusive. A fully paid, week-long retreat at the brand-new Elysium Spire, a luxury resort nestled deep in the Pacific Northwest. An escape. A reward. The departure point was a private airfield an hour outside the city. A sleek black Gulfstream jet sat waiting on the tarmac, its engines humming a low, powerful tune. One by one, the other winners arrived. I recognized most of them. There was Dr. Everett Cole, a genius in genetic sequencing with a nervous tic and eyes that always seemed to be calculating something a dozen steps ahead. Beside him, Whitfield, our lead data analyst, a woman so sharp she could probably find a security flaw in the human genome. It was a collection of the company's brightest minds, a high-octane mix of ambition and intellect. The elite. My people. Then I saw him, standing slightly apart from the others, his posture ramrod straight. Thomas Blackwood, the head of logistics. He was older, maybe 45, with a face carved from granite and the quiet, watchful eyes of a man who had seen things you don't talk about at company mixers. His reputation preceded him. A former Army logistics officer, pragmatic to a fault, a man who could get a convoy of sensitive materials through a war zone on time and under budget. We'd never spoken beyond a few perfunctory emails. He offered a curt nod as I approached. "Arthur Penn, Project Management," I said, extending a hand. He took it. His grip was firm, calloused. "Thomas Blackwood, Logistics." His nickname, I'd heard around the office, was simply Blackwood. He didn't seem the type for casual familiarity. "Quite the reward, huh?" I said, gesturing to the jet. "Expensive," he replied, his gaze sweeping over the airfield, "and remote." The flight was smooth, a blur of champagne and polite, competitive conversation. But when we descended, I understood what Blackwood had meant. The Elysium Spire wasn't just remote. It was surgically isolated. It erupted from the mountainside like a shard of obsidian and glass, a monument of ultra-modern architecture surrounded by millions of acres of raw, untamed wilderness. There were no roads visible, no other signs of civilization. Just the hotel, the forest, and the sky. As the jet landed on a private airstrip carved into a plateau, my phone signal bars vanished. A flicker of unease, as transient as a moth's wing, brushed against me. I dismissed it as a city dweller's withdrawal. The place was breathtaking. Polished stone floors, walls of panoramic glass offering 100-foot views of ancient pines, and a silence so profound it felt manufactured. Our suites were palatial, each with a private balcony that hung over a dizzying drop into the valley below. The staff moved with an unnerving, silent efficiency. They were flawlessly polite, their smiles perfect and unwavering, yet their eyes were vacant, as if they were following a script written for a different kind of play. During a brief tour, I noticed the security cameras. They weren't just in the hallways and elevators. They were discreetly tucked into the corners of the dining hall, nestled among the foliage of decorative plants. Even a tiny, almost invisible lens in the ceiling of the spa's steam room. For a place this exclusive, I reasoned, security was paramount. That evening, at the welcome dinner, I found myself seated across from Blackwood. The food was exquisite, the wine a vintage I could never afford. "They're not sparing any expense," I remarked, swirling the deep red liquid in my glass. "No," Blackwood agreed, his eyes not on his plate but scanning the room. "The perimeter fence is military grade, 10-foot-high chain link, topped with electrified concertina wire. Saw it on the approach." "For bears?" I joked weakly. "Bears don't require that kind of voltage," he said, his voice low. "That's designed to keep something in or out, and it's a very, very long fence." The casual observation hung in the air, chilling the warmth of the wine. We spent the next day indulging. I had a deep tissue massage, swam in the infinity pool that seemed to spill into the sky, and attended a whiskey tasting. But the feeling of being watched, of being in a beautifully constructed cage, never quite left me. The robotic staff, the pervasive cameras, Blackwood's words, it all coalesced into a low hum of anxiety beneath the surface of the luxury. On the second evening, as we finished dessert, a man in a crisp tuxedo appeared. He introduced himself as the hotel manager, his smile even wider and more vacant than the rest of the staff. He clapped his hands together softly. "Honored guests of the President's Circle," he announced, his voice smooth as silk. "As a special token of our appreciation, we would like to invite you on an exclusive tour of our legendary wine cellars. A private tasting has been arranged. Access is, of course, highly restricted." A murmur of excitement went through the group. This was the kind of perk we lived for. The secret menu, the VIP room. We followed the manager, leaving the opulent dining hall behind. He led us not to a grand staircase, but through a service door into a different world. The lush carpets gave way to cold, polished concrete. The warm lighting was replaced by harsh, fluorescent strips. We descended a spiral staircase, the air growing colder with each step. The smell of damp stone and steel filled my lungs. Finally, we stood before a massive vault-like door, the kind you'd see on a bank or a military bunker. The manager produced a keycard, swiped it, and the door hissed open with a pneumatic sigh. He gestured inside. "After you," he said, his smile never faltering. The room beyond was dark. One by one, my colleagues stepped across the threshold, their chatter echoing in the unseen space. I was one of the last to enter, a final sharp spike of apprehension lancing through me. As my foot cleared the doorway, I glanced back. The manager wasn't there. He was gone. Before I could even form a question, the heavy door slammed shut behind us. It wasn't a click. It was a deafening clang of metal on metal, followed by the grinding sound of multiple locks engaging. A final tomb-like thud sealed us in. We were plunged into absolute suffocating darkness. The darkness was a physical presence. It pressed in, stealing the air from my lungs. For a single, stretched-out second, there was only a collective, horrified silence. Then, chaos erupted. A woman shrieked, a high, thin sound that was instantly swallowed by the void. Someone, a big guy from engineering, slammed his shoulder against the door with a meaty thud, followed by a grunt of pain. Curses and panicked questions flew through the blackness, a frantic symphony of terror. What's going on? Is this a joke? Let us out. My own heart was a frantic drum against my ribs. I fought the urge to join the screaming, forcing myself to take a breath, to think. My project manager instincts, the ones that thrived on crisis, tried to surface through the primal fear. Assess the situation. Find a variable you can control. Suddenly, a row of red emergency lights flickered on along the base of the walls, casting a hellish crimson glow. The sight was even worse than the darkness. We weren't in a wine cellar. We were at the entrance to a maze. A labyrinth of towering, seamless concrete walls stretched out before us, branching off into a dozen identical shadowed corridors. There were no bottles, no oak barrels, just cold, brutalist architecture designed for confusion and despair. A soft crackle and then a voice filled the space. It came from hidden speakers, perfectly modulated, calm, and utterly devoid of emotion. It was the same neutral corporate tone from 1,000 HR training videos. "Welcome, members of the President's Circle," the voice said, as if announcing the quarterly earnings. "We congratulate you on being selected. Your time at Elysium Spire is not a vacation. It is the final stage of your evaluation. It is an audition." A cold dread, far deeper than simple fear, seeped into my bones. This was Aegis. This was our company. "Before you lies the first trial," the voice continued, its placid tone a grotesque counterpoint to our reality. "To prove your worth, you must navigate the labyrinth. There is only one exit, located at the far end. Your performance will be monitored and graded. We are looking for resourcefulness, resilience, and the will to succeed. The defining traits of a true champion." Someone near me sobbed, a raw, hopeless sound. "There is one more variable to consider in your problem-solving matrix," the voice added, a hint of something, not malice but clinical interest, creeping in. "You are not alone in the labyrinth." As if on cue, a sound echoed from the deep, winding corridors. It was a sound that didn't belong to any world I knew. It began as a low, guttural growl and swelled into a long, drawn-out howl that vibrated through the concrete floor. It wasn't the cry of a wolf or a bear. It was filled with a ravenous, intelligent hunger that scraped at the deepest, most primitive parts of my brain. It was the sound of a predator that enjoyed the hunt. "Good luck, candidates," the voice concluded, and then clicked off, leaving us in the red-tinged silence, the echo of that unholy howl still ringing in our ears. The fragile semblance of order shattered. Dr. Cole, the genetics genius, let out a choked gasp and bolted, sprinting blindly down the nearest corridor. "No, wait, stay together!" Blackwood yelled, his voice a commanding bark that cut through the panic. But it was too late. Cole's flight triggered a chain reaction. A handful of others, their faces masks of pure terror, scattered like startled birds, their footsteps echoing as they disappeared into the maze. They chose speed over sense, panic over strategy. "Idiots!" Blackwood muttered, his jaw tight. "They're making noise. They're separating themselves." He turned to the dozen or so of us who remained frozen in place. I was one of them, my feet feeling like they were bolted to the floor. "Everyone, calm down and listen to me," he said, his military bearing taking over. "We move together, we move quietly. We stay against the wall, right-hand rule. We keep our right hand on the wall and we follow it. It will eventually lead us out. It's our only chance." His logic was a lifeline in a sea of insanity. I nodded, and a few others did as well. We formed a tight, shuffling group with Blackwood at the point. We chose a corridor and began to move, our every sense screaming. The air was thick with the smell of ozone and a faint coppery scent I couldn't place. Every shadow seemed to writhe. Every distant echo sounded like approaching doom. We hadn't gone more than 50 yards when we heard it. From the direction Cole had run, we heard the frantic pounding rhythm of running feet. They were coming closer, but there was another sound now, too. A heavier, faster, loping gait. Thump, 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 thump. Then came the scream. It was Cole. A shriek of pure, undiluted agony that climbed in pitch until it was cut off with a sickening, wet, tearing sound. Silence. The coppery smell in the air was suddenly stronger. Blood. The smell was blood. No one spoke. The reality of our situation crashed down on us with the weight of a granite slab. This wasn't a test. It was a culling. We weren't employees anymore. We weren't the elite. We were just meat. We pressed on, our movements now impossibly silent, every breath a cannon shot in the stillness. Blackwood led us with grim determination, his hand tracing the cold concrete wall. We passed branching corridors, each one a dark mouth promising either escape or oblivion. The silence was worse than the screaming, filled with the terrifying anticipation of what lurked around the next corner. We rounded a sharp bend and Blackwood stopped dead, holding up a hand. The group piled up behind him. There, in the dim red light, lay what was left of Dr. Everett Cole, or rather what was left of the suit he'd been wearing. He had been ripped apart with a savagery that defied explanation. It wasn't the work of claws and teeth. It was as if he'd been detonated from the inside out. His brilliant mind was now just gore splattered across the concrete floor, a gruesome testament to the price of panic. The velvet trap had sprung, and its teeth were sharper than any of us could have ever imagined. The sight of Cole's remains shattered the last vestiges of our civilized composure. Eleanor Whitfield, the data analyst, made a choked, retching sound and stumbled backward, her hand clapped over her mouth. The noise was a gunshot in the oppressive silence. From the corridor just ahead of us, a low growl rumbled, a sound that vibrated in my chest cavity. Blackwood shoved me back, his eyes wide. "Get back, now!" It was too late. It emerged from the shadows not with a run, but with a fluid, terrifyingly swift lunge. It was immense, easily 9 feet tall if it stood straight, a horrifying chimera of man and beast. Its body was corded with thick, unnatural muscle, covered in a coat of matted, dark fur. Long, disproportionate limbs ended in claws that scraped against the concrete, and its head was a nightmare visage of a wolf. But the eyes were the worst part. They glowed with a feral, yellow light. Yet behind the animalistic fury, there was a chilling spark of intelligent, calculating malice. This was not some mindless monster. It knew what it was doing. It moved with a speed that defied its bulk. Whitfield screamed, a full-throated cry of pure terror, and in a blur of motion, the creature was on her. There was no fight, no struggle. Just a single brutal swipe of a clawed hand that sent her crashing into the far wall with a sickening crack. She didn't scream again. The beast's attention was instantly drawn to the next most panicked person, a junior marketing analyst who was scrambling backward, whimpering. It seemed to ignore those of us who were frozen in shock, its predatory senses laser-focused on the loudest, most terrified prey. This was a culling based on fear, an instinctual selection process. As it moved toward the analyst, I acted on pure, stupid instinct. I grabbed a fist-sized chunk of fallen concrete from the floor, debris from Cole's demise, and hurled it at the creature's head. It was a pathetic gesture, a pebble against a tank. The rock bounced off its thick skull with a dull thud. The beast stopped. Its head swiveled slowly, those baleful yellow eyes locking onto mine. The low growl in its chest deepened. It had dismissed me as part of the scenery, but now I had its full attention. Blackwood yelled my name. Penn. and drew the creature's gaze for a split second. That was all it took. The monster changed its target, lunging not at me but at him. Blackwood, with his military reflexes, tried to dodge, but the thing was too fast. It backhanded him with contemptuous ease, sending him flying into the wall beside me. He hit with a grunt of pain, slumping to the ground. Then it was my turn. It was on me before I could even flinch. I threw my arms up to protect my face, expecting to be torn to shreds. A colossal furred arm slammed into my side, knocking the wind out of me and sending me sprawling. The impact was like being hit by a small car. I lay on the ground, gasping for air, vision swimming. The creature loomed over me, its hot, foul breath washing over my face. This is it, I thought. This is how it ends. But it didn't kill me. Instead, it lowered its massive head and sank its fangs deep into my left shoulder. The pain was a supernova, a white-hot, electric agony that eclipsed everything else. I felt teeth, long and sharp as daggers, grind against my clavicle. I screamed a raw, ragged sound. Just as quickly as it had bitten, it released me, a gout of my own hot blood spilling down my chest. It turned, ignoring my writhing form, and I saw it do the same to Blackwood, who was trying to push himself up. It bit him savagely in the thigh, and he cried out, a sharp, disciplined sound of pure agony. Then it was over. The creature seemed to lose interest in us. Leaving us both bleeding and convulsing on the floor, it turned and bounded after the whimpering analyst, who had used the distraction to scramble further down the corridor. Its heavy, loping footsteps and his terrified cries faded into the depths of the labyrinth. Pain. It was a living thing, a fire in my shoulder, a frantic thrumming that radiated through my entire body. I pushed myself up onto my elbows, my head spinning. Blackwood was doing the same, his face pale and slick with sweat, his hand clamped over the gushing wound on his leg. It didn't kill us, I managed to rasp, the words tasting of blood and disbelief. No, Blackwood grunted, his teeth clenched. It branded us. We had no time to question it. The instinct for survival, raw and powerful, took over. We had to move. We had to get away before it came back. Staggering to our feet, leaning on each other for support, we fled. We ran. A clumsy, limping, agonizing flight through the disorienting maze. We didn't know where we were going, only that it was away from the sounds of the hunt, which were mercifully growing more distant behind us. Why had it let us live? The question hammered in my head with every painful heartbeat. It was strong enough, fast enough, to have ended us in a second. It had killed Whitfield without a thought, but us it had only marked. We stumbled around another corner, the red emergency lighting seeming to pulse in time with the throbbing in my shoulder. And then we saw it. A square of clean, white light spilling from an open doorway. Hope, sudden and overwhelming, surged through me. Without a second thought, we half ran, half fell into the room. We weren't the first ones there. 6 other people were huddled inside, their faces pale masks of shock and exhaustion. I did a quick, frantic survey. Whitfield's boss, a senior engineer, 2 people from accounting, and a few others whose faces I recognized but couldn't name. And I saw something else. Dark, wet stains on their clothes. A woman clutching a bleeding arm. A man with his pant leg soaked in red. As soon as our feet were across the threshold, the door behind us hissed and slid shut, plunging us into the bright, sterile white light of the room. From the labyrinth beyond, the last faint echo of a scream died away, leaving only a profound and terrifying silence. We were the survivors. The room was a 20 by 20-foot white cube. No furniture, no windows, just smooth, seamless walls and the glare of flat panel lights in the ceiling. The air was cool and sterile, smelling faintly of antiseptic. There were 8 of us in total, the battered remnants of the president's circle. We looked at each other, eyes wide with a mixture of relief and lingering terror. The door we'd entered through was now just another blank white panel. Is it over?" a woman whispered. She was one of the accountants, her expensive blouse torn at the sleeve, revealing a ragged, bloody gash. Blackwood, leaning heavily against a wall, grunted, "This isn't over. It's just the next stage." My mind slowly rebooting after the surge of adrenaline started to process. I looked around the room, at the faces of the survivors, at the dark patches of blood. A horrifying pattern began to emerge. "Raise your hand," I said, my voice hoarse. "Raise your hand if you weren't bitten." 7 pairs of eyes stared at me. Slowly, hesitantly, one hand went up. It belonged to a pale, thin man I recognized as Gerald Finch from Payroll. He was trembling violently, his face the color of spoiled milk. He hadn't been bitten. He hadn't even been scratched. "I hid," he stammered, his voice barely a whisper. When I heard that howl, there was a narrow service conduit, the cover was loose. I squeezed inside and didn't move. I hid. The other 6 of us looked at each other, the woman with the torn sleeve, a man clutching his side, Blackwood with his mangled thigh, me with the fire in my shoulder. We all bore the same mark. The beast hadn't been killing indiscriminately. It had been culling the weak and marking the rest. We were the chosen ones, selected by its fangs. But for what? The first hour passed in near silence, broken only by the occasional pained groan or shaky breath. Then the next phase began. It started in my shoulder at the site of the bite. The burning agony began to change, morphing into an intense, radiating heat that spread through my veins like molten lead. My skin grew clammy, yet I felt like I was on fire from the inside out. A violent shiver racked my body, my teeth chattering uncontrollably. I looked up and saw it happening to the others. Blackwood was sweating profusely, his face grim, his breathing harsh and ragged. The woman with the bitten arm was curled in a ball, shaking. We were all sick. A virulent, aggressive fever was consuming every one of us who had been bitten. Only Gerald, the accountant, remained untouched. He watched us from the far corner of the room, his initial relief twisting into a new, dawning horror. He began to edge away, pressing himself against the wall as if he could melt into it, his eyes wide with fear. He was healthy. We were contaminated. My mind raced, tumbling through fragments of forgotten folklore and horror movies. A monstrous, wolf-like creature. A bite that doesn't kill but infects. A raging fever. The pieces clicked into place with a nauseating certainty. Lycanthropy. It was an insane, impossible thought, a relic of medieval superstition. But in this concrete hell, deep beneath a mountain, what was impossible anymore? Aegis Dynamics wasn't just in the business of defense technology. They were in the business of monsters. And they had just infected their top performers. Just as the paranoia in the room reached a fever pitch, a section of the wall opposite the entrance slid open with a soft hiss, revealing a new corridor. The calm, dispassionate voice of the host returned, echoing from unseen speakers. "Primary selection is complete. Congratulations to the successful candidates. Please proceed down the hall and occupy your designated individual quarters. Sustenance has been provided. No one moved. We were sick, terrified, and suspicious of any new direction. "Move," Blackwood growled, pushing himself off the wall. "Staying here won't help us." He limped toward the opening, and one by one we followed, a miserable procession of the damned. Gerald, the lone healthy one, scurried behind us, keeping as much distance as he could. The corridor was long, unnervingly bright, and clinical. It looked like a high-tech prison block or a sterile laboratory. On our left was a row of 8 heavy steel doors, each with a small digital panel next to it. Our names were displayed on the screens in cool green text: Arthur Penn, Thomas Blackwood, Sarah Jenkins, and so on. Opposite the doors was a solid wall of dark, reflective glass that ran the length of the hallway. I had the distinct, chilling feeling that it was a one-way mirror. We were specimens on display. My designated door slid open as I approached. The room inside was a small Spartan cell. A metal frame bed with a thin mattress, a small table and stool bolted to the floor, a combination toilet and sink unit in the corner. On the table sat a tray with a bottle of water and a vacuum-sealed pack of nutrient paste. It was a cage, a comfortable, well-lit cage. The fever was raging now, my thoughts becoming muddy and disjointed. I stumbled inside, grabbing the water and draining it in 3 long gulps. I tore open the nutrient pack and squeezed the tasteless gray goo into my mouth, driven by a primal need for fuel. The energy it provided was immediate but unsettling. I felt my body crying out for more, for something real, for meat. Exhaustion washed over me like a tidal wave. The pain, the fear, the sickness, it all crashed down at once. I fell onto the cot, the thin mattress doing little to cushion my aching body. My last conscious thought before the fever dream sleep took me was of a strange detail I'd noticed as I collapsed. In the wall directly opposite the door I'd entered through, there was another door, identical in every way. A second door, leading to God knows where. 2 ways in, or 2 ways out. I awoke to 2 things simultaneously. A hunger so profound it felt like a physical wound in my stomach, and a voice booming from a speaker in my cell. It wasn't the cold, clinical host from before. This voice was new, it was loud, energetic, and dripping with a synthetic game show host enthusiasm that was somehow more terrifying than the detached pronouncements of our captor. "Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back," the voice boomed, full of artificial warmth. "For our distinguished patrons joining us tonight, get ready for a spectacle you will never forget. It's time for the main event you've all been waiting for, the inaugural Champions Tournament." My blood ran cold. Patrons? Spectators. I staggered to my feet, my head pounding, the fever having broken, leaving behind a strange, predatory alertness. I looked at the dark glass wall in the main corridor, picturing shadowy figures on the other side, watching us. "Our rules are simple, folks," the showman's voice continued. "Only one champion can emerge victorious. Our elite candidates will face off in a series of one-on-one elimination bouts, and tonight, we kick things off with our very first matchup. Let's see who our lottery has selected." A drumroll sound effect, tinny and absurd, filled the cell. In this corner, hailing from project management, a real go-getter who survived the labyrinth with grit and determination, Arthur Penn. My heart stopped. A cold dread washed over me, so absolute it almost buckled my knees. And in the opposite corner, the voice roared. A man who proved that sometimes the best strategy is to stay out of the fight altogether. From the payroll department, Gerald Finch. Gerald. the one who wasn't bitten, the one who hid. With a loud click, the second door in my cell, the one I'd noticed before falling asleep, unlocked and slid open. It revealed a short tunnel leading out into a brightly lit space. From down the hall, I heard another door slide open, followed by a thin, terrified whimper. "Take your places on the arena, gentlemen," the showman commanded. "The crowd is waiting." My feet moved on their own, compelled by some unseen force or the simple animalistic fear of what would happen if I refused. I walked through the tunnel and stepped out into a circle of blood-darkened sand. An arena. Above, maybe 50 feet up, was a thick metal grate ceiling. Beyond it, I could see the silhouettes of people moving in what looked like luxurious glass-fronted viewing boxes. The low murmur of their voices, the faint clink of glasses, drifted down to me. They were watching. They were being entertained. Across the sand, Gerald was being shoved out of his own tunnel by a guard in black tactical gear. The poor accountant was shaking so hard I thought he might come apart. He looked at me, his eyes pleading. From the center of the grate high above, something began to descend on a thick cable. It was a massive, multifaceted crystal, the size of a small engine block, cut with geometric precision. It was a dull, smoky gray color, absorbing the arena lights. It stopped 10 feet above the sand, hanging ominously between Gerald and me. And then it flared to life. An intense, pulsing, ultramarine light erupted from the crystal, bathing the arena in its otherworldly glow. The light didn't just illuminate, it penetrated. The instant it touched my skin, my world dissolved into agony. It was 1,000 times worse than the bite. It felt like every cell in my body was being ripped apart and violently reassembled. My bones snapped, elongated, and reformed with sickening, audible cracks. My skin tore as coarse, dark hair sprouted from every inch of my body. My jaw dislocated and stretched forward into a powerful muzzle, my teeth lengthening into fangs. My mind, my human consciousness was still there. It was a horrified passenger trapped in a runaway vehicle of flesh and bone. I was watching it happen, screaming in silence as my own body betrayed me. But my actions were no longer my own. The driver was something else, something ancient and primal, awakened and supercharged by the crystal's light. A raw, blinding hunger for blood, for the kill, consumed everything. I could feel its snarl forming in my new throat, a sound I didn't want to make. I looked at Gerald. The terrified accountant was a beacon of pulsing life in my new predatory senses. The beast inside me, the beast that was me, didn't see a person. It saw prey, weak, helpless, terrified prey. My human mind shrieked, "No, don't!" But the body was already moving. It covered the 30 feet between us in 2 powerful bounds. Gerald let out a single pathetic cry before the monster that was Arthur Penn fell upon him. It was over in a second. A blur of claws and teeth, the sickening crunch of bone. The crystal overhead pulsed one last time and then went dark. The pain of the transformation receded. The beast's rage subsided, leaving a hollow echo. In its place, the agony of returning to human form began. My bones snapped back, my skin knitting itself together. I collapsed onto my hands and knees on the sand, naked, trembling, and covered in the blood of a man I'd shared a corporate retreat with 3 days ago. Gerald's lifeless body lay a few feet away. I retched, vomiting the tasteless nutrient paste onto the sand. From the speakers above, the showman's voice exploded with ecstatic glee. "And there you have it, folks, a decisive victory. Let's hear it for your first winning champion, Arthur Penn." The sound of polite, enthusiastic applause filtered down from the viewing boxes. The door to my cell slid open. I stumbled back through the tunnel, my body shaking, my mind a vortex of horror and self-loathing. The metallic smell of Gerald's blood was on my skin, in my nostrils, a permanent stain on my soul. As the door sealed behind me, I collapsed against the wall and slid to the floor, my body racked with dry, heaving sobs. I had killed him. My hands, these hands right here, had torn him apart. The psychological impact was a physical blow, more debilitating than any wound. Hours passed, or maybe it was minutes. Time had lost all meaning. Eventually, the initial shock receded, replaced by a cold, sharp clarity. Crying wasn't going to change anything. Panicking was a death sentence. I forced myself to my feet and walked to the sink, splashing cold water on my face, scrubbing at the phantom feeling of blood. I looked at my reflection in the polished metal. The same face looked back, but the eyes were different. Haunted. Older. I began to analyze, the way I would analyze a failing project, breaking it down into its core components. Component 1. The infection. The bite in the labyrinth wasn't random. It was a delivery system for a genetic modifier. Aegis Dynamics, my own company, a leader in biotechnology, had weaponized lycanthropy. They didn't find monsters. They manufactured them from their own high-performing employees. We weren't just test subjects. We were the raw material. Component 2. The trigger. The crystal was the key. Its specific light frequency acted as an activator, forcing the transformation and amplifying the most primal aggressive instincts. Without it, I was just a man with a strange fever. With it, I was a weapon, a puppet. Component 3. The audience. The showman's voice. The applause. This entire nightmare was a blood sport for the ultra-rich. An exclusive entertainment package where they could watch their corporate gladiators tear each other apart. We were their racehorses, their fighting dogs. Our lives and deaths were their amusement. A new sound echoed from down the hall. The showman's voice announcing the next two contestants. A woman from R&D and a man from legal. I pressed my ear to the door, listening. I heard the twin clicks of their arena doors opening. Then silence, followed by the screams, the guttural roars of transformation, the roar of the unseen crowd. A few minutes later, it was over. The showman gleefully announced the R&D woman as the winner. One more of us was dead. Despair was a luxury I couldn't afford. Rage was a better fuel, a cold, calculating rage. I began to watch, to learn. I studied the routine. Food and water were delivered through a small slot in the door at the same time every day. I occasionally saw the guards through the one-way glass in the hall, heavily armed, moving with professional efficiency. They were soldiers, not hotel staff. There had to be a flaw in the system, a moment of inattention, a structural weakness. But my most important discovery came from within. The hunger returned, not just for food, but for something more. And with it, I could feel it. The beast. It wasn't a separate entity. It was a part of me now, a dark, snarling presence coiled in the base of my skull. When the hunger was strong, its instincts bled into my thoughts. The urge to pace, the heightened sense of smell, a low-level aggression that made me want to punch the wall. Previously, I had recoiled from it in terror, but now, I tried something different. I didn't fight it. I didn't try to suppress it. I focused on it, acknowledged it. I tried to have a dialogue with the monster in my own head. I know you're there. I feel your strength. I feel your rage. But this is my mind, my consciousness. It was a strange, meditative battle. I forced myself to remain calm when the waves of feral instinct washed over me. I began to associate the beast not with the horror of what I'd done, but with the raw power I had felt. Power I could potentially use. My human mind, my ability to plan and strategize, was my greatest asset. The beast's savagery was its own. If I could somehow merge the two, human intellect guiding animal fury, I wouldn't be a puppet anymore. I would be a weapon of my own making. I started to prepare for my next fight. I began a grueling physical regimen in the tiny cell. Push-ups, squats, burpees, anything to build strength and endurance. I needed my human body to be as strong as possible to withstand the transformation and the inevitable combat. I replayed the fight with Gerald in my head, not the kill, but the seconds before. The lunge, the speed, the power. I tried to visualize the next fight, not as a victim, but as a combatant. I pictured using the beast's speed to dodge, its strength to counter, its claws not as random tools of slaughter, but as precise weapons. Slowly, I felt a shift. The episodes of uncontrollable rage became less frequent. The hunger was still there, a constant gnawing presence, but it felt less like a master and more like a tool waiting to be picked up. A faint, fragile hope began to dawn. Maybe, just maybe, I could learn to ride the storm instead of being broken by it. Maybe next time, the man would be in control of the monster. The call came 2 days later. 2 more of our number had been eliminated in brutal, short-lived bouts. Now, it was my turn again. Ladies and gentlemen, put your hands together for the return of our very first victor. The showman's voice boomed. He's cunning, he's vicious, he's Arthur Penn. A smattering of polite applause trickled down from the unseen spectators. And his opponent tonight, a man who knows a thing or two about security and tactical engagement. Give a warm welcome to the former head of Aegis Branch Security, the formidable Marcus Holt. Marcus. I remembered him from the initial gathering. A barrel-chested man with a shaved head and a confident, no-nonsense demeanor. A man used to giving orders and taking control. He'd been bitten in the labyrinth too on his forearm while trying to fend off the beast. The arena door slid open. I took a deep, steadying breath, my heart hammering not just with fear, but with a cold, focused resolve. Control it. Guide it. Don't let it guide you. I stepped onto the sand. Marcus was already there, emerging from the opposite tunnel. He looked different. The confidence was gone, replaced by a grim, fatalistic rage. Our eyes met across the arena. There was no animosity, only a shared, tragic understanding. We were gladiators in a futuristic coliseum, forced to kill for the amusement of our corporate masters. We both knew the script. The colossal crystal descended, its smoky gray facets seeming to drink the light. "Let the battle begin!" the showman roared. The ultramarine light flared, and the agony returned. My body contorted, bones snapping, muscles tearing and reforming. I fought to hold onto a sliver of my consciousness, a single point of lucid thought amidst the hurricane of pain and primal fury. Think, plan, survive. Across the arena, Marcus was undergoing the same horrific metamorphosis. His screams of pain mingled with my own, quickly morphing into deep, guttural roars. The crowd above murmured with excitement. This was a main event. 2 fully formed beasts on the sand. The transformation completed. The rage was a firestorm in my mind, demanding I lunge, tear, and kill. But this time, a tiny part of me, the human Arthur, held the reins, however loosely. I saw through the monster's eyes, felt its power thrumming through my new, monstrous limbs. The beast that was once Marcus Holt gave in completely to its rage. With a deafening roar, it charged, a 9-foot-tall battering ram of claws and fury. It was a blind, head-on assault. The old me, the beast that killed Gerald, would have met it head-on in a chaotic frenzy. But I had a plan. Instead of meeting the charge, I used the creature's explosive speed to pivot, sidestepping the attack at the last possible second. The Marcus beast, unable to stop its momentum, crashed past me, its claws gouging deep furrows in the sand where I had just been standing. The crowd let out a collective gasp of surprise. It spun around, snarling with frustration, and charged again. My human mind screamed tactical instructions to my beastly body. Use the environment. I retreated, backing toward the curved wall of the arena. The Marcus beast, seeing me cornered, lunged for the kill. Just as it reached me, I planted my powerful new legs and pushed off the solid wall, using it as a springboard. The move added a massive amount of force to my counterattack. I twisted in midair, slamming into the side of the Marcus beast, knocking it off balance. In that split second of opportunity, I struck. Not with a wild, flailing attack, but with a targeted, precise strike aimed at its throat just as my human mind had planned. My claws ripped through fur and flesh. The beast roared in pain and fury, lashing out and catching me across the ribs with its own claws. The pain was immense, a searing fire that stole my breath. But my attack had been more effective. It was wounded, bleeding heavily from the neck. The fight devolved into a brutal, bloody brawl. We tore at each other, a whirlwind of dark fur and flashing claws. But there was a difference. The Marcus beast fought with pure, unthinking savagery. I fought with savagery guided by intellect. I let it exhaust itself in furious, wide-arcing attacks while I focused on dodging, conserving energy, and landing damaging tactical blows. I took heavy damage. My body was a canvas of deep gashes, but my opponent was tiring, its movements growing slower, sloppier. Seeing my chance, I feigned a lunge to its left, and as it moved to block, I shifted my weight and drove my full power into its injured side, right below the ribs. It staggered, and in that moment of weakness, I reared up and brought my fangs down on its already wounded neck. This time, I didn't let go. The crystal's light died. The blessed relief of the transformation back to human form washed over me. I collapsed to the sand, my body screaming from a dozen deep wounds, my breath coming in ragged gasps. A few feet away, Marcus Holt's body reverted to its human form, lifeless on the blood-soaked arena floor. The arena erupted. This time it wasn't just polite applause, it was a roar. Cheers and whistles from the unseen patrons. They'd gotten their money's worth. Unbelievable. The showman's voice thundered, filled with genuine awe. A display of tactics and ferocity I have never seen. Arthur Penn is not just a survivor, ladies and gentlemen. He is an artist of combat. He is without a doubt the tournament favorite. I pushed myself to my feet, dripping blood onto the sand. I looked up at the grate, at the dark shapes of the spectators, and for the first time, I didn't feel fear. I felt nothing but a cold, bottomless well of hatred. The door to my cell opened. As I limped back into my cage, I wasn't thinking about the pain or the horror. I was thinking about my promise to a man I barely knew, in a labyrinth that now felt like a lifetime ago. I was thinking about revenge. Silence descended upon the cell block. After my fight with Marcus, the arena fell quiet. There were no more announcements from the showman, no more screams echoing from the sand. A quick calculation sent a chill down my spine. 20 of us had arrived. I had personally seen the deaths of Gerald and Marcus. The dispassionate voice of the showman had confirmed the elimination of at least 4 others. Simple math, grim and unavoidable, told me there couldn't be many of us left. Hours stretched into a quiet eternity. My wounds, which should have been fatal, were already knitting themselves together with unnatural speed, a side effect of whatever Aegis had pumped into my veins. The pain subsided into a dull, throbbing ache. The only sounds were the faint, distant hum of the facility's ventilation and the occasional murmur of conversation and laughter from the spectator boxes high above the arena. They were celebrating, waiting for the grand finale. Then, the showman's voice returned, grander and more theatrical than ever before. Distinguished patrons, the moment we've all been waiting for has arrived. After a tournament filled with shocking upsets and brutal displays of power, 2 champions have clawed their way to the top. It is time for the grand finale. A flourish of triumphant synthesized trumpets played. In this corner, the tactician, the survivor, the man who tamed the beast within to become a true force of nature. Arthur Penn. I stood up, my muscles tight, my mind clear. And his final opponent, the stoic veteran, the logistical genius who navigated the labyrinth with unmatched calm and has proven his resilience time and again. Give it up for the one and only Thomas Blackwood. Blackwood. Of course. It had to be him. My cell door slid open. Down the hall, his did as well. Our eyes met down the long, sterile corridor. The last 2. We walked out onto the arena sand, the bright lights feeling like a stage spotlight. The place had been cleaned. The blood was gone, fresh sand laid down. They had prepared the stage for their final act. Blackwood looked older than he had just a few days ago. The ordeal had carved new lines into his granite face. He was limping heavily, the bite he'd taken in his thigh in the labyrinth never having fully healed, a constant, nagging weakness. We stopped in the center of the arena, not as adversaries, but as the last 2 soldiers in a lost war. The murmuring from the spectator boxes above grew louder, a buzz of anticipation. We knew they were listening, watching our every move. But we also knew this was our only chance. Blackwood's gaze wasn't on me. It was fixed on the dark grate above us, on the shadowy figures of our tormentors. He leaned in close, his voice a low, gravelly whisper barely audible above the hum of the crowd. "These bastards!" The word filled with a quiet, venomous intensity. "They sit up there, drinking their wine, watching us die. They have to pay, Penn." I looked from his face, etched with pain and resolve, up to the spectators, then back to him. There was nothing else to say. He was right. "Whoever wins this," he continued, his eyes locking onto mine, his gaze hard as steel. "Whoever walks out of this arena has to get out of this whole damned facility. Find a way. And then you burn them to the ground. For all of us. For Cole. For Whitfield. For all of them. Swear it, Arthur. It wasn't a request. It was a soldier's final command. A transfer of duty. One of us had to die here so the other could have a chance to live and deliver vengeance." I didn't speak. I just gave a single sharp nod. In that silent gesture, a pact was sealed, a covenant written in blood and shared suffering. This was no longer a fight for my own survival. It was a fight for the right to avenge the dead. It was a fight for him. The spectators, oblivious to the oath we had just sworn, were growing restless. Their murmuring grew into an impatient rumble. They wanted their finale. They wanted blood. We took a step back from each other, turning to face one another as opponents. The massive, gray crystal began its slow, final descent from the ceiling, its facets catching the light, promising agony and transformation. The end was here. The ultramarine light of the crystal flared, and for the last time, the fire of transformation consumed us. The pain felt sharper this time, amplified by the bitter tragedy of the moment. We were allies, the last two survivors of a corporate massacre, and we were being forced to tear each other apart for sport. Our human screams of agony twisted and deepened into the roars of monsters, a sound that sent a fresh wave of delighted cheers through the spectator boxes. 2 9-foot-tall beasts stood on the sand, bristling with muscle and rage. But something was different. The fight didn't begin. The beast that was me, its mind tenuously held by my human consciousness, saw the beast that was Blackwood, and it hesitated. The raw, primal urge to kill, to dominate, was there, a roaring inferno in my skull. But the pact, the oath, was a shield against it. We circled each other, a slow, tense rotation on the blood-darkened sand. We snarled, we displayed our fangs, we let out guttural growls that shook the very air, but neither of us made the first move. It was a tragic, horrifying dance, our human wills locked in a desperate struggle against the crystal's maddening influence. The crowd above noticed. The excited cheers died down, replaced by confused and then angry murmurs. They had paid for a finale, for a clash of titans, not a standoff. The showman's voice, now laced with an edge of malice, boomed through the arena. "Come on, champions! Give the people what they want. Show them your power. Show them your fury. There can only be one." As he spoke, the light from the crystal intensified dramatically. The calm, pulsing ultramarine glow became a blinding, frantic strobe. A new wave of agony, sharper and more potent than the initial transformation, lanced through me. It was a direct assault on my will, an overwhelming surge of pure, feral rage designed to shatter our control. I felt my human consciousness slipping, the beast's instincts flooding in, drowning my thoughts. Across the sand, I saw Blackwood's monster flinch and roar as the amplified signal hit it. The dance was over. The puppet masters were pulling the strings. With a simultaneous, soul-shattering roar, we launched ourselves at each other. It was a battle of equals. We were both strong, both fast, both bearing the same dark gift. But Blackwood, the soldier, was the superior fighter. Even in this monstrous form, his movements were more economical, his attacks more disciplined. He parried my lunges, his claws deflecting mine with showers of sparks. He was tactical, even in his rage. But he was wounded. His limp, a phantom of his human injury, was still there, a subtle hesitation in his movements, a weakness in his footing. We crashed together, a whirlwind of black fur and snapping jaws. Claws tore through my hide, fangs grazed my neck. I felt a searing pain as he sank his teeth into my shoulder, the same shoulder the first beast had claimed. But as he bit down, his injured leg buckled for a fraction of a second. He lost his balance, his weight shifting. It was an opening. My beast self, driven by the crystal's command to kill and my human self's subconscious, desperate desire to end this horrible charade, acted as one. I didn't think. I reacted. I drove forward, putting all my weight and power into a single, decisive strike aimed at his chest. My claws punched through his ribs with a sickening crunch. The Blackwood beast let out a final, gurgling roar and staggered backward, its yellow eyes wide with a flicker of something that looked like surprise before it collapsed onto the sand. The crystal overhead went dark. As the agonizing transformation back to human form racked my body, I saw him change, too. I stood there, naked, bleeding from a dozen wounds over the still, human body of Thomas Blackwood. He had died to give me a chance. The weight of his sacrifice, of our oath, settled on me, heavier than any physical blow. Tears of grief and rage streamed down my face, mingling with the sweat and blood. The arena exploded in a deafening ovation. The spectators were on their feet, their applause thunderous. "He's done it!" the showman screamed, his voice ecstatic. "Your undefeated, undisputed, sole-surviving champion of the tournament, Arthur Penn." The door to my cell slid open, an invitation back to my cage. But I didn't move. I stood over the body of my friend, my brother in arms, until two guards in full tactical gear marched onto the sand. They grabbed my arms, their grips like iron vices, and began to drag me away, my feet leaving two long, desperate trails in the sand. They didn't take me back to my cell. The guards hauled me through a series of new, gleaming white corridors to a medical bay that was as sterile and advanced as anything at Aegis Dynamics headquarters. A silent, efficient medical team, their faces as blank and professional as the hotel staff, went to work on me. They cleaned my wounds, stitched the deepest gashes with steady hands, and gave me an injection that dulled the pain to a distant throb. They gave me a clean set of black fatigues and a tray of actual food, steak, potatoes, vegetables, and a bottle of cold water. I ate like a starving animal, my body craving the protein, the fuel. For an hour I sat in the silent medical room, a champion waiting for his prize or his execution. Finally, two new guards appeared. They were bigger, more heavily armed, their gear suggesting a more serious purpose than just managing prisoners. They gestured for me to stand and, without a word, led me down another corridor to a large industrial elevator. We rode it up, a long, smooth ascent that told me we were heading for the surface. The elevator doors hissed open, and I was blinded by real, unfiltered daylight. The scent of pine needles and damp earth flooded my senses, a stark contrast to the sterile, recycled air of the bunker below. We were outside. They led me from a concrete structure cleverly disguised by rocks and foliage as a natural part of the mountainside. Before me lay the vast, untamed forest of the Pacific Northwest. One of the guards, a man with a thick neck and a permanent scowl, pointed a thumb toward the tree line. "You won," he said, his voice flat. "You're free. Go on. Run." I stared at him, then at his partner, searching for the trick. There was no trick in their eyes, only dismissal. Freedom? After everything? It didn't seem possible. But the alternative was to stay here. Without a second thought, I broke into a run, crashing through the underbrush, my only thought to put as much distance as possible between me and that concrete tomb. The branches whipped at my face. The soft earth felt glorious beneath my feet. I ran for what felt like a quarter of a mile, my lungs burning, hope, a dangerous, fragile thing, beginning to bloom in my chest. That's when the showman's voice echoed through the forest, broadcast from speakers hidden cunningly in the ancient pines. "A massive round of applause for our champion Arthur Penn as he claims his grand prize." The voice boomed, full of laughter. "But wait, esteemed patrons, the show isn't over yet. You didn't think we'd let such a magnificent specimen just walk away, did you? Welcome to the final, most exclusive event of the season, the Royal Hunt." My blood turned to ice. From behind me, back at the bunker, powerful spotlights flared to life, cutting through the daytime shadows of the forest. I heard the savage, excited barking of dogs and the shouts of men. I spun around. Emerging from the woods near the bunker was a party of a dozen people. They were dressed in expensive hunting gear, carrying high-powered rifles with advanced optics. A pack of sleek, muscular Dobermans strained at their leashes, their barks echoing through the trees. It was them, the spectators, the patrons. They had paid for the ultimate thrill. To hunt the most dangerous game. To hunt the champion. A wave of despair washed over me. So profound it almost brought me to my knees. It was all a lie. The freedom, the victory. I was just an animal being released from a cage into a larger one. But then something else rose up through the despair. An all-consuming glacial rage. I thought of Blackwood's body on the sand. I thought of his final command. Burn them to the ground. The oath. I felt the familiar fiery heat begin to build in my blood. The prelude to the change. But this time was different. There was no crystal. There was no agonizing, forced transformation. There was only my will. My rage. The fever was my own now, a furnace I could stoke myself. I focused on Blackwood's face, on the sound of the spectators' applause, on the cold, hard promise I had made. I let the beast out. I didn't fight it. I welcomed it. I ran, and as I ran, my body began to shift. It wasn't a painful tearing, but a fluid, powerful reshaping. My bones lengthened, my muscles swelled, my skin thickened into a tough, furred hide. My human mind didn't scream in terror, it remained cold, clear, and in command, perched atop a raging sea of predatory instinct. I was no longer Aegis Dynamics' puppet. I was no longer Arthur Penn, project manager. I was the weapon they had forged, and I was turning it back on them. The sounds of the hunt grew closer, the baying dogs, the crunch of boots on leaves. I stopped. I turned to face my pursuers, my new, powerful body coiled like a spring. I lifted my head and let out a howl. It wasn't the sound of a trapped animal. It was the roar of a predator, a promise of violence, a declaration of war. The hunt had begun, but I was the hunter now.